Hey everybody, Ken Newhouse here, host of the Get Clients Now podcast. Got a very special guest with me today. I've got David JP Phillips. David, you're in, I'm going to correct me if I'm wrong, you're in Switzerland or Sweden?
That would be Sweden, sir.
Sweden. Sorry, I get you mixed up with Peter Fry. Peter Fry is an elderly gentleman who flies. He's got a company here in the U.S. as well as there. He employs like 300 people here in the United States, about 20 minutes from where I live, but he goes to my church when he flies into the United States. And so I get Sweden and Switzerland mixed up. Obviously, Sweden is a much nicer place, yes?
I don't know about that, but yeah, they are different. They are different.
They are different. Okay. So anyway, we covered your bio in the introduction. I know you're a busy guy. You just had a huge launch of the JP University. Tell me very quickly how'd that go again? Because I know it was just a smashing success.
Ooh, yeah, it was amazing. It was on the opening day in 48 hours. People from 76 countries signed up. That is mind blowing. Yeah. When I look at the world map, it's like there are more signups from different countries that I didn't even know existed.
Well, that's right at half the number of countries in the entire world, because I think there's about 160 countries, unless I'm just wrong. Maybe that's first world countries, but I know that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. So David, let's do this. I've got a couple questions that I like to ask all my guests. They're pretty routine questions. And so the members of the Get Clients Now Nation are familiar with these, but if you could take a minute or two and give us your backstory. I mean, obviously, maybe if someone's listening or they're watching YouTube, they may not know that you've got like a bazillion, like millions and millions and millions of views on your YouTube for the TEDx presentations you've done. You've done multiple presentations for TEDx. You've got Death by PowerPoint, storytelling, presentation skills. I mean, you're like one of the most sought after world-renowned experts on storytelling and high-level communication. So if you could give us your backstory, tell us how you got to where you are now. What led to all this?
This came, I do believe it came from my parents. They were highly interested in philosophy and psychology. And I remember a particular day when I was sitting on my bed. I was 15, 16 years old. My mother comes in and she says, "Hey, David, you should read this book." And she gave me a book. And if you're a mother in your right set of mind, you do not give that book to an already existentialistic breaking down teenager, because the book's name was The Existentialism by Jean-Paul Sartre. And I did as my mother told me. I read it. And the day after, I realized that life was pointless, that everything was pointless, and that anything I did was pointless. It took me about a week to realize the true philosophy behind existentialism, which came down to the core of that I control my own fate and my own destiny. That led me to become incredibly interested in my own brain, which led me to when I was 17 years old, I bought my first electroencephalograph to measure my own brain waves. So imagine I'm sitting in my attic. I've got silicon and I've got cables coming down my head. I'm trying to figure out what stimulates my brain in different ways. I think that was kind of the basics of my absolute passion and my devotion to how we human beings work from a communicative perspective. So that's where it started. That's where it began. And then I've got this sense that I feel sorry for human beings. I don't know where that comes from, but it's the strongest emotion I can feel. It's stronger than love. It's stronger than my motivation. I feel sorry for every human being that is not given the opportunity to be able to communicate their ideas, their thoughts, and their concepts. I find it so frustrating that some people are given this skill, and by so they earn more money, better careers, they sell more stuff, they tell better stories, they get better engagements, they live longer, etc., etc., etc. Some are not giving this skill. I think that is unfair. And somehow I've always had that in my being, and that is where I come from. And I think what makes me different from every other speaker on this planet on this subject is that I am a true nerd I'm analytical, and I break subjects into their absolute smallest element, put them together again so that they become comprehensible for other human beings.
Sweet. Okay, so just real quick, I'm going to edit this part out, but you don't have to look at me on the, you have a laptop?
Yeah, kind of.
Look at your, look at your camera like I am the camera. And
yeah.
That's kind of what I do, is just kind of look at the camera, but I want people to see your face. You gotta, I mean, you're a young guy, or you're younger than me for sure. And you got a captivating face. You got a great smile. I want people to see that. So you don't have to look at me. That's the tendency I do. I'm going to cut all this out. Okay. So David, so we'll roll back with that. Okay. So David, speaking of mentors, is there any, you mentioned your mom, is there an individual other than your mom, or an incident other than, buying your own EEG or ECG when you were younger and doing all this stuff? Has there been one person? I know you've interviewed and studied, very deeply studied and analyzed the work of over, what is it, like 5,000 different professional speakers and storytellers. But has there been an incident or an individual that really just inspired you to say, hey, I'm going to go for this. This is what I'm going to do. Thanks. Like I said, whether it's a book and sometimes I ask that question about the book because somebody will throw down a book and I read 2 to 3 books a week. And that's how I find a lot of really good books. So maybe it's not a book. Could be one of your parents, could be a friend, whatever it is.
Well, of course, it would then be Jean-Paul Sartre. And then after that, I would say it is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Have you read it?
No, there's a movie out by that name though, isn't there?
Yeah, you should not watch the movie.
No, I didn't watch the movie. I'm not a big TV person, but I read, unfortunately, I started reading more fiction lately over the last couple of years, but I've read mostly, I'm a retired chiropractor. And so I don't read a lot of medical books, but I read a lot of stuff on brain science because I was hit by a dump truck head on back in 1994, 18 surgeries, 9 days in a coma. Couldn't see. I saw double vision. I had diplopia for 6 months after my accident. And so for me, I wanted to learn as much as I could about my brain once I started to recover, because first of all, I wasn't supposed to live. And then secondly, I was told my family was told I would never be functional at the level I was prior to that. The weird thing is that after I recovered, I have some short-term memory deficits from time to time. So you and I could be talking and I'll completely forget what we're talking about. And then it'll come back to me. But I'm actually functioning at a much higher level than I was prior to the accident in many different areas, which is fascinating to me, but it's also confusing to the neurologists who've worked with me over the years. So having said that, anybody for you come to mind that really motivates you or inspires you?
Elon Musk, definitely recently, man. I love the idea where he goes like, okay, don't do something just double as good as somebody else. Don't do it triple as good as somebody else. Just do it incredibly different so there is no competition. And that is what I did with JP University. I reinvented education, and I didn't do double, triple. I just did something incredibly different, so there's no competition.
David, I've been a student and a friend of Dan Kennedy's, mean old Dan, for a long time, and the stories of his death are greatly over-exaggerated. And then we have Frank Kern and so many other high-level people that charge lots and lots of money. But when it relates to or comes to the skill of communication and storytelling, body language, voice inflection. I chastised you kindly, obviously, when we talked last time. JP University is by far, it has so much in there. And let me say this just very quickly. It has so much information. I've never found anything like it. When I say so much, I don't want to give people the impression that it's just going to overwhelm them, because it's not. Everything is broken down into bite-sized chunks, little snippets. And it's like hold you by the hand and you walk them through the process in the platform. And now you've added even more stuff, which I saw this morning. I've been a member myself. I am a paid member. This is not something I got for free. You haven't promoted anything with me. You haven't given me any money or anything like that. I am a student of JP University. And I have to say that it's by far as my communication skills, the best investment I've ever made in myself as a business person and as a human being. And there is no question about it that it's helping me make more money, get more clients. And actually, the thing that I'm most interested in is I'm able now to charge even more. I have 6-figure clients. I'm even able to charge more for what I do and be much more selective about who I work with. So having said that, David, in the platform, you've got death. I'm going to run through these real quick. Death by PowerPoint, death by video conferencing. And there's like a bazillion not a bazillion, but dozens and dozens of videos and articles and just all kinds of resources under each one of these headings. The magical science of storytelling, which was the thing that really got me interested when I first found you, when I watched your TED Talks. You got a section on presentation skills, body language, voice inflection, and like there's a lot more. And obviously I don't have time to go into it, but I want to start our conversation today focused on storytelling. How important in your mind, in your estimation, is it for a person to have, a business person? This is a business podcast. How important is the skill set of storytelling? How important is that for us to have in a business setting if we want to be successful, serve our clients, customers, or patients at the highest level, have them know, like, and trust us, and for us to make just tons and tons of money?
I would say it's absolutely fundamental. There is no single communication skill or sales tool on this planet with such a high precision to change another person's psychological behavior. There is simply none.
It's amazing. What about, can you give us a few examples of what learning this skill? Let's say you've got, business person A here, and they're doing pretty well in their business, but they're not really good at storytelling, or they're telling themselves, this question came up yesterday when I talked to Lisa Krohn. She wrote Wired for Story and Story Genius. She's more on the research side, not doing the presentations like you. And she writes books on how to write books and tell stories in books. But she basically said that most business people don't take storytelling seriously. It's like an ethereal concept to them. It's, let's be locked in and unemotional about our decisions in business and things like that. And that couldn't be that's the worst advice you could ever give someone in business. So how important is the skill set of storytelling to a business person? Take a minute or so and talk about that versus not having that skill set. Someone has it, someone doesn't. I know it's made a huge difference for me. It's huge, huge, huge.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, well, first of all, every single decision we take is driven by an emotion or an instinct. There is no questioning that. Every single decision we take is driven by an emotion and instinct. Therefore, if you want somebody to take a decision, you need to influence their emotions. And in my TEDx talk, The Magical Science of Storytelling, I became the first person in the world to induce different kinds of emotions in my audience on command through different kinds of stories. And the key question here is, what is an emotion? Well, what we know today is that an emotion is a combination of neurotransmitters and hormones. So not only do I create different emotions in my audience, I created different neurotransmitter reactions based on different kinds of stories. So why is this important? Well, you have a set of basic neurotransmitters and hormones in your brain and body. We go from serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, testosterone, and cortisol. These flow in your brain and your body, and they define who you are and your emotions. And as your emotions are the driving force to all your decisions, what kind of emotions you create in yourself and in others is absolute key. And then having a look at science, if I were to increase your oxytocin levels at the moment, which I could do with a story, and I do that in my TEDx talk, it takes me about 2 minutes, I can elevate your oxytocin stories, and that we know scientifically will and can possibly then increase your generosity level by up to 80%. So imagine that you walk into a room, you have clients in front of you, and you wish that within a couple of minutes, they would become more generous to you. Boom, you induce oxytocin into their brain by telling a story that does exactly that. Now, these neurotransmitters and hormones, what I can do is more or less, I can tell a story for each of the single neurotransmitters to create a different emotional impact in you as a person. As for instance, in a business talk or a meeting, you should not be delivering testosterone stories in the beginning. They should come to the end of the meeting. If you induce the wrong neurotransmitter in the wrong timing, you will have the wrong effect. So learning this that's what the magical science of storytelling is all about. And it became the second most viewed TED talk in the world on storytelling. And it's almost like, it's a redefinition of storytelling because it actually makes it practical for real for salespeople and people around. It's not something that's in a book. It's not a weird thing. It's scientific. We know what makes an impact.
Yeah, and the thing, David, that I really enjoyed about that TEDx talk in particular, and I've watched it, I let me rephrase that. I've studied it. I've literally broken it down over and over and over again and watched it. You're not a person who's standing at the front of the room just regurgitating facts. You're actually deploying what you're teaching live in front of millions of people who are watching this TEDx talk, and plus the, you know, the audience, what is it, a couple thousand people? It's pretty sizable audience.
Mm-hmm.
You're actually causing this to take place on camera in front of people. So it's not like you're an instructor at the front of the room or a presenter who's just saying, this is what happens, this is what you do. You actually did it while you were teaching about it. You actually utilized it. And so I was really fascinated by that. How important, David, is it as we, you know, you mentioned the sequential order or a different order for triggering these emotional, hormone releases through the stimulation of specific emotions as we tell stories. Is there a particular order that we want to kind of go in when we do, say, a sales presentation, whether it's to a live audience? You know, I do webinars, I do live face-to-face presentations, and I wouldn't call it a presentation, but that's what it is. I'm there to get money. So, or in fact, I will do like a live in front, well, not now with the social distancing and all the stuff's going on, but I have, and I will again do live audiences with anywhere from, say, 50, 25, 50, 100 people who've paid, you know, $5,000 to $10,000 to be there. And so when I do those, is there a particular order? If I'm going to, like, I'm in that sales mode where I'm getting ready to do the presentation where I want to sell, is there a particular, you just mentioned you don't want to stimulate testosterone release. So let's say I'm diving into my actual hardcore presentation at that point. Don't want to start off with testosterone. What do I want to start off with? And is there kind of a sequential order, or does it really depend on my audience and my individual?
Yeah, well, you can adapt it accordingly, but just to give you a generic answer, which would work in most instances, I'll give you the neurotransmitter and the hormone and an example of how to induce that. So we would start with endorphins, for instance, by creating a laugh. You would then move over to serotonin by making them feel seen and respected, and to increase your own credibility. And then you would dive into oxytocin for them to feel empathy for something that you've done or said, or for somebody else. And by so you increase their generosity. After that, you tweak into cortisol by creating pain, maybe even adrenaline by creating massive pain. Pain in the form of that they see a major problem. You then give them a bit of a solution by inducing dopamine. You then create a little bit more pain by cortisol and adrenaline. You induce some more dopamine. You build the dopamine climax for them to feel the absolute desire to have what you are giving them. You give them hope, you give them motivation, you give them desire through dopamine. You do this successively, just as a movie goes on. It builds, it builds, it builds, it builds. And as you near the end, then you launch some oxytocin to increase the empathy and generosity again. You trump that off with some testosterone for them to take action on what you've said to them. And then perhaps you'll also add a bit of dopamine for the motivational boost at the end. So they'll actually not just take action on it, but they'll do it really quickly.
Nice. That's what I was looking for. That's exactly what I was looking for. Now, something just came to mind. It's not on my list of questions, but something just popped. I don't know how it just popped into my head, but I'm glad it did. You mentioned that you love to fish, and I am an avid fisherman. I'm a bow hunter and I love to fish as well. I don't know what you fish for there. What do you have, like northern pike and muskie and things like that? Do you have bass? Do you have largemouth bass and smallmouth bass there?
Yeah, we call them perch over here, but yeah. That's right.
Is that so? What do you like to fish for? I know when you started talking about fishing, I'm like, I knew there was a reason I like this guy right away. So, and you talk about that, I think, in JP University. So,
it's just simple fishing over here. We go for pike, perch, salmon, rainbow trout. That's kind of the
nice
four fish we go for.
I'm looking at my trout poles over here in the corner of my studio over here, and I've got my shotguns and stuff over here when I go bird hunting. But anyway, so let's move into the next question, David. What do you find are the biggest mistakes, like the top one or two biggest mistakes people make when they're trying to tell a story during a presentation?
Well, number one, they don't do it strategically. They just hope for the best. I definitely promote strategic storytelling by far. Number two is that Usually they don't believe in the story enough themselves. They don't animate it enough. The more they animate it, the stronger they believe in it themselves, the more other people will believe in the story as well.
Okay. And what about when an individual is telling what they believe to be a story, but it's really not a story? Do you find that there are basic elements or components that have to be present when you're telling a story?
Yeah. If dopamine isn't in the story, it's not a story. And there has to be what I call hooks. So there has to be a hook where you tell them that, so I opened the door and I sensed something was wrong. I still approached, but now I got even more worried. I carried on, and you build it like that by dopamine hooks. So you don't know what's going to happen. That's kind of one of the core elements to all kind of storytelling. You can retell a scenario, but if you don't have dopamine hooks, you'll kill the story.
And that's really basically just using curiosity. Is my understanding correctly? You're using curiosity to keep them attached to the story and literally suck them into what you're saying?
Yeah, anticipation is key to storytelling.
Bingo. That's what I was looking for. What about, I mean, you've got so much stuff on the platform. What about, people that tell stories? They could be better storytellers if they master the art of voice inflection. How important is voice inflection when we're telling stories? And then again, give an example or two of that. Sometimes I'll just say this quickly. When I interview people, sometimes they're like Mr. Robot or Mrs. Robot, very monotone voice. And they're like almost afraid to do the interview. They obviously, maybe they're a new bestseller or whatever, or they're a business person and they're not used to being in front of a camera. They're just not animated. They don't inflect their voice. They're not charismatic, things like that. So how important is
voice? Okay, a good analogy would be this. You have a Hollywood actor. They know their manuscript. They've trained it. They know it word by word. And then they stand in front of the camera and they lack the voice inflection and body language. Boom, they go down. They will not become famous. They will not become anything that you ever want to see again. You're down for the count. Yeah, it's that serious. Having a story is one thing. Delivering it is definitely equally as important, sometimes even more important. You could actually take a really boring story, a really bad story, but by animating it and using voice inflection, you can make it engaging. You can't do the opposite.
And when you talk about animation, and quite honestly, like this, I want to follow that up. So animation, you're talking about body language, utilizing your body to tell the story along with your words. Yes?
Yes. And your facial expressions.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so how important is that? And then let's just assume this is like the follow-up question with that. So give us an example of why that's important and how important it is. But then let's assume that the person is not live in front of the presentation. Let's say they're doing a tele-presentation where there is no visibility, like the prospect can't see them. In my mind, I would still suggest the person still be animated, still use voice inflection, because that's going to come across. The animation they're not going to see it, but that's going to come across in your voice inflection. Am I on the right track with that, you think?
Yeah, no question about it. No question about it at all. I recently delivered a big keynote for IBM, 1,000 people. And they called me up and they said, hey, can you deliver this keynote for us? And I went like, yeah, sure thing. I do keynotes constantly, so I'll be happy to come to you. And they said, no. We want you to stay at home. Okay, cool. I've got a superb camera set up. And they were like, no, it's not on camera. We're going to do this audio. I'm like, wow, that is super cool. I'd love to do that. And I simply just hooked up a mic and I delivered that keynote as if there were 1,000 people in front of me. I stood up, I animated, I used my facial expressions because they're all associated and interconnected. So you can't just not do one thing because it'll impact the other things. The effect of that audio keynote was amazing.
Okay. Let's do this. Let me see here. I've only got a couple more questions. You doing okay for a couple more questions?
I'm yours, man.
Okay. I think I asked you this, but I ask you a little differently. What would you say, David, are the biggest mistakes people make during their PowerPoint presentations? I know you've got an entire TED talk and a book, if I remember correctly. You do have a book on doing how to do PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint, I think is what it's called. But what are the top 3 mistakes you think people make during a PowerPoint presentation?
Number 1 easily is that the person believes that the PowerPoint is the presentation. Bad mistake. You are the presentation. People buy what you say, how you say it, your facial expression, your engagement. That is what people buy into. Your PowerPoint is just a visual aid. That is number 1. That is key. Number 2 is that we pack too much information into the slides. It's mind-blowing. If I ask you, if you get on a train or even an aeroplane, how easy is it for you to remember where you are going to sit? Which seat you're going to sit in? How many times do you have to check your plane ticket before you know for sure where you're going to sit? You do that 2 or 3 times. Imagine that is 2 or 3 numbers. But from somewhere people come up with the idea that, hey, when I show my PowerPoint, I can easily show 30 numbers. But no, our brains are so limited when it comes to our working memory. Don't do that to people. Treat your PowerPoint as a plane ticket. Make it visual, make it easy to understand, make it possible to associate it with something. Just limit it. Less is more. Absolute key. And I would say that the third thing is, there's so many to choose between. I would say.
Well, let me share one thing that I learned from you that I learned in the JP University and I actually just deployed this in one of my webinars, is that when I did a bulleted list on the screen on one of my slides, and I think I had 4 different bullets on there, when I put the first bullet up, I did it in kind of a bright red color so that it stood out. But then when I popped the next bullet up under it, I changed the color of the first bulleted line so that it was barely visible. And so only that you could see the second bullet that came up, and that one was bolded and in red. And then when the third bullet came up, as I rolled through my webinar, the first and the second one were sort of a kind of a lighter gray color. So they didn't jump off. You could still read them, but they definitely did not jump out and grab your attention. So all your mind could see and your vision snapped right to that point was each one of the bullets that I went through were highlighted in red and bolded. And so as I went down the list, it just looked like the red bolded letters were moving down and the other ones kind of faded into the background so as not to just be this big morass of stuff on the screen. And I was making that, I was making that same mistake. I actually don't use the PowerPoint projector when I do presentations. I use an old overhead projector with the clear slides on it. And then I just pull one off and put another one on there. And then I turn it off when I'm talking. And if I want them to see something, I turn it on. And actually, I learned that from mean old Dan Kennedy. And the first time I saw him use that, I was at a seminar. And I paid $7,500 to be at a seminar. And one of the ladies in the audience said, hey, can you turn that back on? Now, I don't recommend doing this. And that's just the persona he built for himself. But he said, hey, lady, when you can fill the room with 300 people at $7,500 a head, then you can tell me how fast to go or how slow to go. Because she said, hey, you pulled that down too quickly. I didn't get everything to write down. Well, he didn't want you to write everything down because he wanted to sell you stuff. But he was quite crass and quite rude to her. But I learned how to use the overhead projector because the PowerPoint, people just leave it on and they turn and read it. Turning to read your PowerPoint and turning your back to the audience was something else I learned in JP University. I've seen people just make that mistake countless time after time after time. And it's like the death knell of your presentation.
I'll take those any day, man. The first one I call the contrast effect. Definitely play around with that. And the fourth one is angle. And that is insane how people misuse that. It's just, can you
explain the angle? Because people might not know what that is. I know what it is because I've gone through the university, but explain what that is so they know what you're talking about.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What's interesting is that any one of you you're listening at the moment, if you go to any kind of social situation and you stand and you talk to somebody, you will tend to angle your body toward that person to show interest. And the more interesting the subject and the person is, the more your angle will be angled towards them. Your body will be angled towards that person. When you lack interest for this person, you will finally end up with a 0-degree angle, i.e. you are standing shoulder to shoulder and talking to each other. That is like that is the ultimate signal that you are bored of each other's company and that you're looking for somebody else to go and have a chat with. And this is human behavior. This is how you behave constantly in life. But for some unknown reason, when we stand and we deliver a PowerPoint, we tend to angle our body toward the PowerPoint, thus signaling non-verbally that that is more important than the person or the audience that you're actually talking to. Your angle should always be focused towards the audience because that will signal your interest in them.
It's very good. Now, I was going to ask you about the Angel's Cocktail, but I think we've already covered that, I think, in sufficient detail, you think, or no?
And the only thing I could say about that is that in the storytelling keynote, I talk about the angels and the devil's cocktail, and I do that in my self-leadership and my leadership courses as well. So let's just turn that one around and say this. The neurotransmitters and hormones that you allow to exist in your body and into the concentration that exists, they define who you are as a human being. So for instance, if you get up in the morning and you scroll through the news and that's hurtful for you, you read something sad, that increases cortisol. And then you look at Facebook and you feel envy. And now you've reduced your serotonin levels. And you keep mixing a devil's cocktail into your system, that will reduce your efficiency, your productivity, your creativity, your motivation. It'll impact your entire being if you mix the devil's cocktail in your blood. Like, for instance, the opposite then is waking up in the morning, looking at your phone, maybe looking at some amazing images from last year. You just close your eyes and you are grateful for 3 things that happened yesterday. You get out of bed, you compliment somebody, or you think about something that you're going to do today which makes you excited. These things will then induce oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine in you, and they'll let you go out flying out of the door, and you've changed your entire being. Learning how to mix the angels and the devil's cocktail, I would say that is probably the most fundamental knowledge any human being should have in life. Full stop.
I would agree. I would totally agree. And again, this is a business podcast, but again, let me just say this. I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and then we're going to talk about JP University before we wrap it up. But what would you say if someone were to say, okay, let me reframe that. So David, let's just assume this. Obviously, I'm recommending and I'm guaranteeing JP University. So I know my tribe, and I do believe a lot of them are going to respond to that. But let's assume that someone says, hey, listen, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I don't have the money right now. I want to do this, but I don't have the money. Can you give me 1 or 2 takeaways, maybe just quick bullet points that would help me be a better, more effective communicator? That would be one question that I would ask you. What would you say to them?
I would say that out of the 200 chapters and the thousands of tips in the JP University, I would say one thing, and that is, to the largest possible extent, reduce your filler sounds. A filler sound is commonly used by a human being who is uncertain, insecure, lose their train of thought, or they're lying, or they're thinking. Now, the only positive one of those is thinking. The other are negative associations, which means that when you hear a person and they're using filler sounds to a large extent, not only could it possibly be irritating, but it's also signaling negative values. Like, for instance, are they lying? Are they uncertain? Have they lost their train of thought? Therefore, I would say, if you use a lot of filler sounds today, just get down with it and reduce those filler sounds to an absolute minimum. It's okay to have 5% filler sounds because it makes you sound more human. So you shouldn't remove them all, but remove 95. That will make people look at you in a different way. They will value what you say in a different way. Your credibility will be higher in everything that you say. It's absolutely fundamental in storytelling. I would say that, yeah, out of the 200, boom, just do that. It'll change the way people view you.
And so when we talk about filler sounds, we're talking about ums and ahs and what else?
Yeah, all those yeah, whatever version they come in. Not filler words, that's a different thing. That's a different chapter, but filler. And all of these, they come from the study I did on 5,000 speakers for 7 years to, I believe I became the first person in the world which defined the 110 communication skills that we human beings use passively or actively when we communicate. And I did that in order to make it understandable. And one of these 110 is filler sounds. And that would be the most important one of all the 110.
That's amazing. And actually, again, these are all taught in JP University, and I've gone through those, but at the same time, I opened up the university this morning, logged in, and it's like, bam. I mean, there's so much more stuff in there now. I'm like, okay, so wow, you've been busy. So in addition to this launch, and so, well, David, let me ask you this. This is my last question, and then I want to talk about JP University for a minute or two. What's the one question today that I should have asked you that I didn't?
I would I would say that question depends on what you title this podcast, because we've been talking about communication a lot today. Storytelling is communication. 110 steps of excellence is communication. Death by PowerPoint is communication. And I think that the question could have been, what is my definition of communication? And my definition of communication is this. Until I cracked my own depression 5 years ago, which I'd had for 20 years, I believe that communication was using your body language, using your voice, using storytelling, using PowerPoint. But then I learned that that was only half the story. That is what I define now as external communication. Internal communication is an entirely different story. And that is what you say to yourself in your own head when you succeed, when you fail, when you go into a meeting, how you boost yourself up. The way that you prime yourself is half the story to your success in communication. So I define communication from internal, i.e. what you say to yourself, external, how you broadcast that to other people. And just to give you an example of how this chain of reaction would actually work. You are sitting down, there's a walnut in front of you. You eat the walnut because you know there's a substance called tryptophan in the walnut. This is then converted into serotonin. And serotonin is sent up through your vagus nerve into your brain, and it usually elevates a smile on your face because serotonin impacts your mood. As a person passes you by, you smile at them. And as you do that, you launch what is called a Duchenne smile by contracting your orbicular, ocular, and zygomatic major muscles in your face. This now induces oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin into your brain, making you even happier because you smiled. But the thing is that the person that cycled by you, thanks to their mirror neurons, they copy your smile. And they launch the orbicular and the zygomatic major, and they induce serotonin, oxytocin, and dopamine into their own brain. Now they cycle home, they go to bed, and they sleep well that night. Why? Because the serotonin that you gave them through the smile is converted into melatonin, and that is the substance required for deep sleep. When they wake up in the morning, their cognitive abilities are greater. When they're traveling to work, they see a boy who's 4 years old, who's passing a zebra crossing, and thanks to their enhanced cognitive skills due to their sleep, they stop in just the right moment and they don't run over the 4-year-old. All thanks to the walnut that you ate instead of a bag of French fries, which would have reduced the serotonin levels and your cortisol levels. That, my friend, is communication from start to end. And if the human race, if people all over the planet knew that, knew how this affects us from start to finish, we would have a different world.
That was awesome. Okay, and so let me just follow that up with, that was instructive in and of itself because of the hormone cocktail that you just stimulated in everybody listening to the show. So David, take a minute or two and tell us what you want to tell us about JP University. And again, guys, if you want to invest in JP University, go through the training. I'll put a disclaimer on this. You got to at least implement some of this stuff in here. You have to complete the training. You can't just sign up and never use it and then say, okay, Ken, you promised to guarantee it. I got you on audio, I got you on video, because I'm a man of my word. You guys know that. Actually, somebody called me on a book guarantee, and I had to buy them a book. No big deal. I used to guarantee my patients would be absolutely 100% thrilled with the outcome. I could never guarantee a cure. But having said that, invest in JP University. And David, again, you don't charge enough for it. I think it's worth multiples of what you charge. But guys, use JP University. If you complete the course, you're going to be able to say, this has literally transformed my life and my business and my income. And if you can't say that for some benign, bizarre, strange, weird, abnormal reason, call me up or email me and I will buy your registration. I will reimburse you myself with cash. That's my guarantee. Having said that, so you guys know that I'm an advocate for JP University. David, tell us about JP University and why it would make absolute total sense for anybody listening to become a member of JP.
I don't think I can do it better than you, my friend. It's
well, just kind of give us kind of an overview of what's in there, because there's really, I mean, there's a ton of stuff in there. It's just amazing. It really is.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm blown away, Ken. You called me up 2 weeks ago and you just praised JP University from start to finish. And you said, I want this to be on the podcast. I want to give this to other human beings. The thing is that you are not receiving anything for this. I have not asked you to do this. I am blown away that you want to do this. And I am just honored in the way that you're doing it. So I just want to say that. Bar none. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not an affiliate. Guys, I'm not an affiliate. There's no special link you have to use or anything else. I'm not in the loop when you go register. You don't have to use my name, nothing. It's that good. That's why I'm promoting it.
So yeah, what is JP University? Well, it is an online resource to learn communication. I believe it is the most comprehensive resource in the world to become a better communicator. And when I built it, I had the vision of Elon Musk. I didn't want to do something that is double or triple as good as anything else. I wanted to do something incredibly different so that there is no competition. So I was inspired by nature and inspired by atoms. And whatever you see around you, everything is built up of atoms. And the ingenious idea with that is that it's like Lego. From Legos, you can build anything. So I thought, hey, why not do that to communication? Why not just break down communication into its smallest element? By doing so, I can build any kind of course or training that you could ever desire. And that is what JP University, it's a reinvention. So it's a periodic table of 200 chapters. You can take them in any order that you wish, because the days are gone when you should just learn one subject. If you're going to go to a job interview, you need a bit from that subject, a bit from that subject, a bit from that subject, a bit from that subject. If you're going to do a negotiation, you need a bit of this, a bit of this, a bit of this, a bit of this. It's all so individual based on your situation. That is what communication is all about. Communication cannot be one subject. A communication is a combination from many subjects in total. So that is what I love. In the last one, we have built 15 levels of gamification, and it is unheard of. And
I like that.
Yeah, we're stimulating serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphins in the system because we want you to become addicted to learning how to become a better human being. I think that's the best addiction you can have in life. So that's the part that I love. In the JP University, I've hidden letters. And if you find these letters in the different lessons and you put them together, you'll open a secret page. And under that secret page, there's a surprise, which nobody knows because nobody's done it yet. So that's one of the gamification steps in there. But there are full-length keynotes by me, which no one has ever seen before, which you constantly, you gather points and then you open them up. So I love that bit as well. And I'm proud over that, with the way it looks. We assigned a painter who's painted so much of the graphics, and it's so beautiful. It makes you smile when you open it.
Yeah.
I love that. And it's supposed to be easy. You can use it wherever and whenever you want to. I believe that it's a reinvention of online learning for everyone. It'll probably become a standard in the future for so many other.
I could easily see that. Yeah.
I guess that I'll just put it like this. I was interviewing 20 people yesterday from all parts of the world to get testimonials for the JP University, and they're saying, "Hey, this is not a communication training program. This is I think they said something like, this is a holistic program for life development, business development, and communication development. It's just a one-stop solution."
Yeah.
So that was interesting to hear, all the way from India to the US to Finland, Russia. It's cool that, 76 different countries.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's do this. Let's wrap it up, and then can I get your feedback for like a minute or two?
Yeah, sure. Let's see here. So
I'll ask you the question. So let's just wrap. I'll edit this last part down. I'll have it edited. All right, David, I want to thank you for being on the show today, and I will email you and let you know when the show's going to go live, and hopefully somewhere down the road we can have you back on.
I'm here, man. I'm all for it.
Awesome. Okay, so here's how I want to do this. So you've been on podcasts before. I've watched a couple of the interviews, or at least one of the interviews. I've watched a lot of your TED Talks. I want to make this a better experience. So from the perspective of being the guest, from the perspective of being an incredibly busy, very successful person, what was your experience like? Take 15 to 20 seconds and explain what, as a busy professional person, what your experience was like as being a guest on the podcast, on my podcast.
So from the very beginning, if I take it from the start, you gave an incredibly professional impression. And then as soon as I said, yeah, let's do this, I think I received 3 emails which detailed everything that was going to happen. Even my assistant said that that was super professional, and she was blown away by that. In the interview itself, I think the questions were super relevant. Let's see here. Okay, so you did, the questions were really relevant. Your answers, the way you picked them up, you cared about the answers. You reconnected to the answers. You followed up on the answers to the next subjects. I enjoyed that. I would say the only bit of improvement in content for me was that when I neared the end, I wanted to set the context. What is communication for me? And I think that could probably have come earlier, to set the context for what's going to come. And maybe that would have made more sense to the listeners.
I can move it. I can have it moved up, so we can move that to the front of the podcast.
Yeah, I think that could make sense. But then, I know. And then
you think that's a good idea? I can do that. You think it'd be a good idea to move it up?
On the other hand, there's in the dramaturgical curve, you should end off with something powerful. And I think when people come to that section, they'll be blown away, because they go like, oh shit, communication is so much bigger than anything that I've ever thought about before.
Well, normally, David, what I do is I'll take a snippet anywhere from, say, 40 seconds to a minute long, and I'll front load that. I'll pull that from somewhere during the interview, and I'll front load that. So when people start the podcast, that's what they're going to hear. And so that last question I ask usually generates, and I picked that up from Larry King, that generates that awesome snippet that sucks people in. So what you gave at the end, the beginning of your last little spiel, that's going to be front loaded. I'm like, man, he just gave me my opener. Then will come the intro to the show, then my little short monologue, and then we go into the interview. Let me ask you this. If someone were to ask you, hey, listen, another successful person, or just someone, hey, Ken has asked me to be on the show. If they were to ask you, take 5 or 10 seconds and tell me, what would you tell them if they were to say, hey, Ken wants me to be on Get Clients Now. What do you think, David? How was your experience? Should I do it?
I would say, absolutely, be on Ken's show. Hey, man, he's he is beyond nice. He is incredibly eloquent in his language. He cares about the questions, follows up on the questions, and he cares about his listeners. And I think those are are the fundamental pieces for any interview at all. And I think you tick them all. So I'm impressed, and I'm still like,
What's the one thing I could do better to be a better interviewer?
I'm bewildered. All right, I would say.
And this is my personal. I want from I respect your opinion, so I want to know, what could I do better? Just one thing that comes to mind. Cut me deep. I don't care. I don't take anything personally. Don't be afraid to say anything.
I don't think that's wrong either. Okay, so your pace is pretty intense. Your pace and emphasis and tonality is intense. But I think that what that does, I think it can stress some people who are not as certain about what they're going to say, because they feel that, hey, you are super mega duper professional at what you're doing, and then suddenly they are supposed to answer something, and I think that could make some people nervous.
Okay.
Then on the other hand, the way that you use your language and the way you say it and your tonality and your pace, I think that really does make sense in a podcast as well. And personally, it does for me, because I hate slow podcasts. I hate slow speakers in podcasts. I know people, they double and triple the speed of their podcast because the podcast is too slow. So I think it's, in a podcast scenario, I think it's a good thing, because that may lead to this guest speeding up as well. It made me speed up, for God's sake. And so, yeah, I just ponder on that. Your pace, speed, and tonality will influence the guest. And if they're not ready for it, they might not be able to answer as well. So if you're going to ask them a complicated question, you could tone down your pace.
Okay.
And by so leading them into the opportunity of taking it easier themselves.
Okay. I appreciate that. I'm going to definitely review I'm going to go back and study. I actually do these things that I talk about. I study my own self, listen to it, critique. I do want to get better. So that's another reason that I joined JP. So now that you've told me there's a hidden key in there, I'm going to have to dig in. But anyway, so listen, I'll get this edited, and then I will shoot Sarah an email and let her know when it's going to go live. And then we'll go from there. I'm thinking probably 2 weeks. I mean, I've got at least 10 podcasts that are ahead of you, but I'm going to bump you to the front just because I just did a huge series on storytelling, and it finished a month ago. And Lisa Cron she's probably sold more books on storytelling than just about anybody that I know of. And I had asked her to be on the show, and she had responded, but I never saw it. And so then 2 months later, she emailed me, but now my podcast series is coming to an end. So by the time we got her interview, which was yesterday, the storytelling series had finished, but I'm bringing you two guys together. So I'll ask your opinion. She draws a lot of people's attention, but so do you. So do you want, we got primacy and recency. Which one do you want to be, the first or the second? Because I'm going to do a little mini addendum to the storytelling sequence we did, which drew a ton of downloads.
Wow. Geez, man, I'll leave that up to you.
Okay.
I wouldn't know. Yeah, both of them. So pick the one that you think fits the best.
Well, you definitely, it's just two different people. I mean, she's coming from the point of how to tell stories, writing books. Then I had her, but she's working on a third book. So how storytelling applies to business, which won't come out for another year, 8 months or whatever it is. And you're just, you're much more sophisticated and much more in depth in this, because you're talking about communication, body language, voice inflection, self-talk, just so many more things. So I think I'm going to end with you, because I've got so much to build on, and because you have a resource. I recommended her books, but I guarantee JP University, because I believe in it. And I think I want the best for my listeners and my clients. And I make enough money that I don't have to worry about promoting someone else. It doesn't bother me. I really do want what's best, because that only reflects positively on me. And so that's where I'm coming from with this, is you got a great resource. Personally, I've benefited from it immensely. I've only scratched the surface, and it's been due to time, but I'm excited you had a lot more stuff in there. And I just want to, again, thank you personally for doing that. You've done a lot. And it means a lot to me that you've done that. It's always nice to work with someone or meet someone or talk to someone who's at a super high level and who, like I say, who gets it, who understands that they're not just regurgitating stuff. You've done something that I think is well, you're already there. You're already legendary, as I like to say. And so it's only going to grow from here. And I wish you the best of success. And hopefully we can have you back on down the road.
I'll be happy to come back, Ken, any day. I'm yours.
Awesome. I appreciate the time, and I'll be in touch.
Super professional. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.